There's some decisions that I've made in the past that I would probably say I'm regretting a little bit now, but life, that's just life, and you have to learn to adapt. And unfortunately, these instances happen, and you have to yes, that decision that was made may have not been the correct one, but from that I've managed to have a good year of just complete self-improvement and kind of finding myself, if you wanted to kind of call it like that a little bit. So no, I would never do anything different. I don't think anyone should have that mentality of, if you fuck up, you fuck up, you learn from it and you move on. There's never live with a regret.
Mr. Maw, how are we?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm good. We were just talking about the amazing benefits of this podcast studio that we are using. So
the 6 countdown's a little bit too awkward.
Yeah, for those who don't know, it counts down from 6, which I think is just a painful attempt to be niche in this day and age. But you've got to be different, don't you? You've got to be different. So to kick things off, why don't you just give a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
My name is Thomas Maw, but I think a lot of people know me as TM Cycles. I've been in the industry now for about 10 years. I started the whole Instagram and YouTube thing back in 2012 during the London Olympics. And then ever since, it's kind of just snowballed from there, really. So been kind of dipped my toe into the bodybuilding world a little bit. I don't really consider myself a bodybuilder, or I didn't really consider myself a bodybuilder back then. As much as I was in it, I always kind of had a wandering eye to other ventures, but had good fun in that. And then the last year and a bit, I stepped away from the stage, and then under your influence as well, and got very into much the hybrid style of training. So I'm just kind of finding my feet and finding what works for me and where I want to go in terms of my future at the moment, both physique and business-wise. And it's a little bit daunting, I must admit, kind of being in that world for so long and then switching your model. But it's been met with a really nice kind of open-armed approach by a lot of followers and new followers. So it's been nice, been good fun.
Fantastic, good to hear. Could have gone the other way, I suppose.
I know there is always there's always that possibility. Yeah,
there's always the fear, isn't it? I think it's hard to let go of. But what was it that drew you to bodybuilding in the first place? How come that was the direction that you went in? Because I know it was something I was drawn to when I was younger, and for my own reasons I sort of decided it wasn't necessarily for me. But what was it for you that it represented when you first dipped your toe in the water?
I think it was the discipline that really attracted myself into it. And I did a lot of team sports, and I got toward the end of the team sports whereby I would put in a good performance. I'm not trying to slate my fellow peers here, but I'd put a good performance in, and if we lost, it would be like, well, I get this sort of a little bit of stubborn. I'm quite a stubborn character, and I get annoyed. And bodybuilding allowed me to kind of pursue a sport, if we can call it that. I don't know if you can really call bodybuilding a sport, but it allowed me to be the kind of sole individual in the outcome of my performance. So I really liked that element. And it was around the time when I started getting into kind of being fascinated with certain film characters like Tom Hardy. I thought, well, that size kind of appealed to me as a late teen, early 20. So it was a chance for me to get into the gym, and the camaraderie in the gym is always good, and that environment was a lot of fun. And then it got to a point whereby my old coach, my very first coach, did a photo shoot, and I was like, God, that's crazy level of condition. I'd love to try that one time. So then we did it, and then you kind of just get the bug, really. You get the bug, you do a competition prep, and then you go into an off season, then you could do a competition prep. But then toward the end, that cycle got so intense, and I started to see kind of small fractures appear, both physically and psychologically. It was just like, I'm getting nothing out of this. I don't want to become a pro. I don't want to go to that Olympia level. Not that I probably could, but I'm sacrificing quite important time here of my life for a few minutes on stage and a pat on the back and a potential gold medal. So yeah, it got to the point where I was like, something needs to change here.
We'll go back to the sort of psychological side of things and that sort of detachment that you've now had from it. Not complete detachment, but a bit of a more holistic approach to that style of training. But what was it, in the same vein, sort of same question, what was it that drew you to thinking, you know what, I'm now going to start shouting about what I'm doing on social media? London Olympic Games, you sort of reference as the starting point. So we're coming up 10 years now. You've just done just under 500 videos from what I've gathered. There might be a few that you deleted out of shame like I have. But what was it that drew you to that in the first place?
It's funny you say that. A lot of those videos I had to manually delete because it was at a time when YouTube got really funny about anabolics. So any keyword, I lost millions of views at this point. It was quite you know, it was a bit of a sinking feeling, and it was a one day out from my second show as well, so not what you want in terms of cortisol levels, but I had to go through my YouTube and manually delete anything that had testosterone or PCT or steroids in, because I had 2 strikes, and the third strike means you're gone. YouTube won't, you know, they won't sit you down in a room and say, oh, okay, no, you're a nice guy, we'll give you your channel back. Once it's gone, it's gone. But yeah, the I suppose just being around that environment and seeing the most elite individuals in the world kind of inspired me to pursue and document my own journey, really. And it was at a point whereby anabolic steroids wasn't really talked about, and when it was discussed, it was more so in kind of an Americanized Rich Piana type, you know, whoa, we're doing this and that, and it was like, don't know if that was giving out the best image for anabolics. Why don't I document my own journey? Obviously not, it's quite a fine line between documenting and not having to kind of promote it, and so I was very much insistent about going down the educational route, and then it kind of just snowballed from there, really. But then I suppose the branches from that were people were interested in your lifestyle, you know, the odd occasion whereby I'm experimenting, I'd go out with, you know, my partner at the time, and I get really good response from that. I'm like, well, maybe there's a little market here for people that want to watch you get into good shape, but also how you dress and where you go and eat and where you go on holiday. So it was just about kind of experimenting, really. And even 10 years down the line, I'm still experimenting with what works and what doesn't. So yeah, it's I suppose it's nice, good fun.
It is, isn't it? It's rewarding in its own way, but it's also uniquely challenging in a way that's quite intrusive on day-to-day life, which again, I think is something that we'll probably touch upon. But the journey that you've been on from a bodybuilding point of view, I know you'll reflect on it now as a somewhat, the fractures will be the thing at the front of your mind, I can imagine. But
yeah,
what did you gain as an individual throughout the sort of the peak of your career, the training, the progress? Because it won't have all been the negatives that you might now reflect on that have led to a bit of a change. There's obviously a whole lot of positives, whether that's connections, network, people you've met, all the experiences you've had. What have been the highlights from that career for you?
Yeah, as you mentioned, definitely the networking element. I mean, we've got a really good podcast now, me, Josh and Joe, and the ability to have networked and met people in the industry, which is, you know, it's tough. It's hard because I think bodybuilders in general get quite a bad rap with, you know, who they are as individuals. So it's nice to have met, like, I suppose, the good guys and do a couple of collabs. I don't really like to call them collabs just because it's, you know, every time I meet someone and they're like, oh, you collabed with Joey D. It's like, well, he's a mate of mine and I like him. I'm not collabing him. I'm just going to go and see him. But the networking has been fantastic. You know, the events like Body Power and seeing finally kind of putting faces to names that have been, I only know people as Instagram names. So I'm like, oh, you know, like J_97 finally found your face. But I suppose that another element of that has been the discipline that it's instilled, you know, having to go through a 6-month prep whereby you can't go out and eat, you can't have alcohol, you know, you have to say no to social events. What I'm noticing now is that ability to really dig deep in different scenarios now, whether it's like I'm doing a 10K cycle ride or we'll do like a boxing drill and I'm like, I can see people flagging and I can motivate them and pick them up. So there's definitely those sort of areas that I'm very grateful to have had. So that mixture of discipline and networking has been definitely the main two.
From a commercial point of view, how long have you been full time with YouTube?
Full time with YouTube, good question. Must have been, I'd say probably about, I'll have to quit. There's a YouTube video on my channel called I Quit, and I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I just left GNC. I just wasn't, they weren't happy with my performance there, and I can understand that. I used to sit out the back with all of my kit. I used to set up like my laptop and my screen, and like they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing it on my lunch break," but obviously there was only one person that worked every time at GNC, so whenever a manager came in and I was at the back, I was like, oh shit. So I think they got a little bit happy, and then the chain closed anyway, so I got out just in time. So yeah, I think the last 4 to 5 years have been kind of full time. I was working for Luke Johnson at Shredded by Science, now with the PT Collective, kind of doing videography work for him, and he got to a position where I was like, right, you need to go now. Like, not in a negative way. It was like, you can see the progression. It's time to let you go. You know, he's given me the tools, and I will always be incredibly grateful for that guy. So yeah, the last 4 to 5 years, it's very daunting doing it straight away. I suppose when you lose that safety net financially, you know, and it's all on you, you've got rent and bills to pay. It can really creep up, and I suppose at that point is when like the kind of stress levels took the next notch up.
You've already mentioned it in terms of discipline, but I know that the 2 years that I spent almost solely on power building, let's call it, not really a thing, but let's use it contextually here for the sake of argument. The 2 years of real focus on body composition that I experienced and put myself through have given me a new understanding of discipline, control, and understanding my relationship with that control that I can now carry with me into my day-to-day life and actually let it spill over into all aspects of my day-to-day life. So I can imagine commercially, as an entrepreneur, as running your own business, running all these things on a day-to-day basis, spinning many plates, there are so many elements of the discipline from the bodybuilding journey you've been on that really underpin all that.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's weird because there was a couple of years ago when I used to look at the kind of 5 a.m. cold shower getter-uppers and think, "Well, you idiots." And then now I'm like, I get up at 5, I have my ginger shot and I have a cold shower, and I'm thinking, oh, God, I've turned into the person that I used to mug off, which is it's absolutely fine, I suppose, just sort of natural progression. But there's so much benefit to doing that, and that routine. I am like a creature of I need that routine, and I feel my mind becomes a little bit skewed when I'm off routine, but I've stepped away from the stage. I have got a lot better at being a little bit more spontaneous, which is nice. I've kind of got that portion of my life back, but I still need to, even if I go out, I went out last night, I'll still need to go, right, in order to get my 8 hours, I've got to go to bed at this time and wake up at this time. It just means that work gets shifted, and it's manageable, it's doable. But I think when you're in that bodybuilding world, there's no room for error in the bodybuilding, and now there's not necessarily room for error, but it's more flexible, I suppose.
You're very punitive on yourself, aren't you? That there's self-destructive elements where you just implode if you feel like you've done something wrong, or if you've cut a corner, if you've eaten at the wrong time, consumed too much, all this stuff. And from a psychological point of view, obviously you've spoken about it quite openly online recently in terms of your departure from bodybuilding in its formal sense, but what was your mental health like entering bodybuilding in the first place, and how has that? When do you think it really turned? When was the moment where you decided, you know what, this isn't giving me what I once got from it?
I think probably three or so years ago, and when you can start to kind of visually see the impact of what bodybuilding is doing on particularly relationships, I think at that point you're like, what do I do here? And it's really hard because you're like, well, bodybuilding is essentially not my job, but what that entails is a job, content creation, clients coming from it. So it's like you're almost you get into this really tricky spot with mismanaging time and kind of just making excuses, and it's a really weird spot to be in, because you can see visually the impact that it's having on people, but there's almost a stubborn element of it, and it's almost this quite cold, emotionless character that I was. And it was around at that point I was like, right, I need to do something about this. The plan was to compete, but then lockdown happened because of coronavirus, so it got put back. And then even during that time, I think for a lot of people, they regained some form of normality and they regained some life when lockdown happened, because you're spending more time with people, and I had that. So it was almost like that topped me up a little bit, to the point where I was like, well, got enough in the bank now, I've spent enough time with you, I'm going to go back to that world. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, I'm thinking of competing. It was just that straight drop, and I thought, surely I can't inflict this on someone. It's horrific, but I want to go out on a high, I want to finish it. I want to do the show. Managed to win it, but it was a bit, it was incredibly bittersweet because we did separate at the beginning of that. So it was tough. Like I said, it's very bittersweet. But I'd say when you can start visually seeing the impact on people, as much as they're supportive, that's almost a little bit of a facade, because you can deep down see that, behind the supportive nature, it's a little bit of resentment. So yeah, I'd say the last three to 4 years when my mental health took a little bit of a decline.
And you're very open about it online, but let's sort of rewind to the sort of starting point in terms of the decision-making process that you went through in terms of your first cycle of anabolics, because it's a part of bodybuilding that is spoken about quite openly, but not nearly as open as it potentially should be in terms of a mainstream understanding. There's a lot of confusion around it. There's use, there's abuse, there's legal implications in some part of the world, and I think it. I've just had a fly go into my mouth.
Protein.
Protein, yeah, good. I might just keep that in there because that's quite funny. But there are considerations and obviously things that you've been very educational about on your own channel, But talk us through the mindset that you were in, the decision-making process when you decided, you know what, I'm going to commit to my first cycle here.
Yeah, I think it was seeing the other competitors and speaking to people and saying, you know, you're going to find it hard being on that stage natural. You know, would you consider doing a natural show? And I was like, well, not really. You know, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Not to say that natural bodybuilding is not doing it, but it was like, well, I'm gonna try it. I was kind of, it was a bit of a point in my life whereby it's essentially switching one poison for the other, and that's what I used to see it. I'm like, well, I'm quite happy if it means that I'm not going out and partying and taking drugs and drinking. Then I'm putting another drug in my system. Then happy days. You know, it's instilling discipline. There is some, I suppose, health benefits to a bodybuilding prep through the food and the cardio, but ultimately it was like pick your poison type. So I was quite happy with doing that. And then it was at the point whereby I was starting to question the information. You know, what is the best first cycle, and then I'd think that's like quite a lot. I suppose it helps my mum being a nurse as well and having a little bit of a kind of understanding there. So then I started to question it, and I was like, well, I'm working with a guy that is from a kind of scientifically backed, evidence-based nutrition and training. Where's the scientific element within anabolics? There must be some, and there is. There's, you know, I remember buying William Llewellyn's sort of anabolic Bible. It's massive, and it was the first time whereby you can start to understand different half-lives, different esters, clearance times, post-cycle therapy, and they just weren't adding up. So all the information that I was receiving online did not, you know, match the information that's being quote unquote prescribed. So it was at that point where I was like, right, I need to probably start documenting this and talking to people and spreading information, or possibly the right information. And then it kind of snowballed from there, really. In the first, I remember doing my first like testosterone only cycle video. Got quite a few views, and then roll the clocks forward. You've got the likes of Dr. Dean St. Mark, who's just been putting out such stellar advice when it comes down to kind of estrogen management as well, and not necessarily using aromatase inhibitors because their impact on lipids, and you want to use this compound to kind of balance it out. And the industry changed, and I think the industry has changed massively over the last 4 to 5, maybe longer years with its opinion and its stance on steroids. I think it's a lot more accepting now. Whereas back in the day when I first started, the mention of it instantly ignited that kind of stigma of very dingy bodybuilding gyms, needles, and very unclean. Whereas now, the response that a lot of us are getting that have been speaking openly about it for 10 or so years is really, really positive.
What are the main considerations that you think an individual should go through before making that decision? Because I one of the reasons I left powerlifting was because I saw the upward trajectory that sort of continuing to get stronger and stronger in that sort of space would lead to, and decided that long term that wasn't the direction I wanted to go down. And now being in a sort of different space where it's obviously much more balanced, it isn't really a thought that sort of comes into my head anymore, because I'm not in that echo chamber of you're as strong as you can be, add in the anabolics to keep getting stronger and stronger. But for a general individual, a sort of gym goer, it's probably a thought that most gym bros have had at some point in their life. What are the main considerations that you would recommend from a experience point of view, from a psychological point of view, and from a sort of practical point of view?
Yeah, I think the understanding that one cycle, the one cycle mentality, the one cycle approach just that doesn't work, and it isn't sustainable, and the potential to really ruin yourself off the back of one cycle is there. You could be one of the unfortunate ones that takes a 10 to 12 week anabolic steroid cycle and never have kids, and then you have to weigh up, is that 10 to 12 week blast where I've put on X amount of muscle and feel and look good worth the fact that I can't have children now? Or it could stem from I've taken anabolics and my body responds really bad to it, and I've now got kidney issues or heart issues or liver issues. So it's just that kind of understanding that just one. I think one big narrative in the industry is that there is a safe way to anabolic steroids. There's a safe way to cycle, which I can understand. There's definitely a case of kind of damage limitation, but you can't always say for certain that even a low dose testosterone cycle is safe, because you could be one of the unfortunate ones. I think you also need to understand the psychological impact of you become an addicted, not necessarily to the substance. It's not like an addictive substance, but what I tend to find a lot of, and when I get insane amounts of DMs from younger guys that have had that mindset of, I'm going to do a first cycle because I've got Ibiza, I've got a holiday coming up. Now I've got back, I want to do another one, and I want to do another one, and I want to do another one. And they said to themselves that they're only going to do one because they get so addicted to the confidence increase. You know, a lot of these guys are quite insecure, and they want the anabolic steroids to give them that boost in confidence. They get addicted to that, and then they think, well, if I come off steroids, then I'm going to revert back to my old self. And along the same lines, it may exacerbate whatever kind of predisposed type of individual you are. You know, if you're angry and you've got a short temper, I can bet a lot of money that those anabolic steroids are going to heighten that. So there's so many different branches from, you know, there's so many different issues when it comes down to understanding how severe these side effects and the impacts of anabolic steroids can have. And I think what we're seeing now is an increase, especially for the long-term steroid users, is this increase in kind of neurotoxicity and what certain compounds are having and how they're almost altering. And I can say from previous, and I know a lot of people will agree with me, using compounds like trenbolone, I used to take that and I was a completely different person. I was not sane. I was not, you know, in this kind of normal sphere that we're in. I was in a hyper reality, and everything was high, and I've got to do this, I've got to go out on the weekday, and I don't care if I'm drinking. And you know, that psychological mindset for anyone is just not healthy at all. So there's so many different red flags when it comes down to that, you know.
So the bottom line is really, really consider the position you're in, the reasons why, and make sure that you've got the evidence-based understanding and probably people around you to help keep you informed and accountable to the reasons you're doing it, I guess.
But also, yeah, absolutely. But also, you need to kind of look at yourself and your own physique and go, how much can I get out of this process naturally? Those that respond best to anabolic steroids will have, and I always use Josh Bridgman as a prime example, because they've squeezed so much blood out of their natural stone to the point whereby if you introduce just a small amount, the results are exponential. It's incredible. Whereas a lot of the guys, and myself included, didn't really have a grip on proper training intensity or food. And I just threw anabolics in to you know, as I thought they would just be this miraculous drug that would turn me into Mr. Olympia. That isn't the case at all. So there's that definite, I need to get the most out of my natural physique. And I think for the vast majority of people that use steroids, they should be using them with the thought process that I'm going to be on them for a long time. I really, you know, there's a lot of guys that I speak to now that have that, I've got a holiday, I've got this, would you recommend a little bit of Anavar, this mindset of like, oh, it's only a little bit. Just don't do it. Like, just, you know, and you'll be surprised. No one really gives a shit. Like, if you go to Ibiza and you're on or you're off, no one is going to go, have you taken a steroid cycle? No. Well, this like club's only for anabolic steroids. So that mindset is completely skewed. Do you know what I mean? I really believe, like, we're in a world where no one really gives two shits about what you look like. So as soon as we detach from that kind of that mindset of, right, I need to take steroids.
Nice arms, bro. How much do you bench? Isn't it? It's not, oh, you're handsome. It's not. Sadly, the facade that we think it is. But I think that's one of the main reasons I decided to move away from body composition focused work when I was only 18, 19, I think it was because I was sort of 4 years deep training. I'd spent 2 years really, really over-indexing. 17, 18-year-old growing up in Scotland who took 6 months sober because he wanted to be as jacked as possible in Scotland. To reiterate, that's very, very niche. And I decided that as I started to get leaner and leaner and leaner, my perception of myself started to get more and more skewed. And I decided that actually I was starting to get that psychological breakdown where I wasn't quite happy with the progress that I'd made, even though that's what I'd set out to do. And then I had a bit of I moved into strength sports and then decided that if I was ever to sort of focus on just the lifting side of things, I think long term, the way my personality is, if it was ever just that complete chasing the next 5 pounds of body weight at that body fat percentage, chasing the next 25 kilos in the bar without getting heavier, all this sort of stuff, I think that there was probably the reality for me was I probably would have started considering that sort of line of thinking, which is sort of why I've changed pace now, and it means that it can keep me focused on performance goals, because performance goals are what get me buzzing, and I don't really care how I look due to the nature of how I train. I'm in decent shape, but I'm not sort of mad jacked year round. That's something that probably helped my YouTube channel, to be perfectly honest, if it was something to consider. But beyond that, it's not something that I'm fussed about, which is good for my mental health. But going back to the psychological element, now that you've detached from bodybuilding as a formal discipline, you've mentioned that the psychological effect that coming off cycle for the people that you speak to on a day-to-day basis, losing that size, losing that recovery, losing all the benefits, quote unquote, that come from being on cycle. How have you managed to process all that?
But it's, as you mentioned, now it's become sort of performance based, and I'm not I've shifted from looking into the mirror and going, oh, my delts need improving, to let me try and beat this 50-meter butterfly. So that change has been absolutely fine. It's been welcomed with open arms, because I still take great pride in my appearance, and it's weird because, I've booked Ibiza. I'm going with the boys in June. We just started the challenge, so we're kind of all getting into condition together. So I'm still very excited to see what I can do with the conditioning in my body. And I think the reward when you are natural is so much more. I mean, it's almost like back in the day when I was slapping 20 kilos aside on a shoulder press or a bench press, I was getting sort of very little from it. Whereas now, the buzz I get from putting 2.5 kilos on a plate to do a pendlay row, I'm like, oh my God, well done. So for me, I suppose because I was so unhappy toward the end, any change was welcomed. It wasn't a case of me being really happy in bodybuilding and I love taking anabolics and I love the way I look and then changing. It was a case of like, I'm sick of this. I need something new. I need to get back into team sports. I need to fight. I need to swim, cycle. So it's not really impacted me psychologically too much. There's a very small, faint feeling of like, oh, I do miss that strength element, but then I'll take that on board and soak it in and go, right, well, we can still be strong as fuck naturally. Like, let's do it, and then that knock-on effect is obviously you get a lot more out of it. And sometimes when I'm in the podcast room with Josh and Joe and I look at the size of them and think, God, I'd love to. I remember feeling like that. I remember being 111, 112 kilos, but then they start talking about can't sleep because they got them app masks on and I can barely breathe or walk up the stairs, and I think, why would I want to look like that? You know what I mean? You put us all in a cage together and you could barely fight a 30-second round, or like, you know what I mean? There's so many different strains that I'm getting away from that now, that it's just, it's not affecting me too much. But I get that question a lot. How have you coped psychologically with the change? And I suppose I've been bodybuilding for 8, 9, 10 years. I've still got the base, the foundations. And when I do make switches to training volume, when I do start to get more condition, it's still under there. Like, it's not gone anywhere. It's just not as full and it's not as vascular, but I'm all right with that. It's not too much of a concern.
You're still in the top 0.1% of jacked individuals in the UK, I'd imagine, as well, which is probably easy to forget, again, in that echo chamber of the top-end bodybuilding that you've been in. I think that's often where it's easy to be hard on yourself. Do you think it's a young man's game? Do you think what you've come to is a maturity consideration, or just the fact that maybe long-term bodybuilding wasn't right for you? Or do you think bodybuilding is a young man's game?
I think it's a young man's game, because I think you look at the old, and no disrespect to the older guys, but you look at those older generations of bodybuilders that still eat, sleep and breathe, and you see them in the gym with their kind of 70s leather belt on, and you think, God, like, that is, how have you done that for so long? There's no, what excitement are you getting from life, So I definitely think it's a young man's game. I definitely think it's got a shelf life, and you look at the likes of kind of Chris Bumstead and how he, even at his age now, like 24, 25, I think he's talking of like it's going to be his last Olympia soon. And I think when you see, especially in the day and age now of social media and how much of a positive response that we get from avenues away from bodybuilding, Chris being the sort of poster boy for classic, and people get more interested in, oh my God, he's on holiday wearing these shorts. It's like, well, it's nice to, I suppose, dip your toe in for a few years and then have an exit plan. I think would be my recommendation. Having that, I'm gonna bodybuild for 3 or 4 years, but in that time, and I think the couple of boys that I'm with now, they're not coming toward the end, because I think they're both very, very focused on still being the best in the world. But you can kind of see that right, I need to start thinking about what I'm doing after this, you know. And we're all the same, pretty much the same age. And I feel like I made the jump first, and then maybe they're looking a little bit at what I've done and going, oh, it can be done. You know, I think a lot of bodybuilders are scared because they've built their whole core value on being a bodybuilder, whereas I don't think I was ever really Tom the bodybuilder, so it's been quite an easy step away for me.
You're a creature of habit. You've said you're very disciplined from your 10 plus years of bodybuilding, and you are very well placed to document these habits that you have online. You've already mentioned a few of them that you've instilled recently. So do you want to just talk us through what a typical day of productivity optimization looks like for you? Because I know it's something you're hyper focused on, and it's something that you want to get right. But you've tried a lot of things. You've probably got a lot of things wrong. So do you want to just share with us what things you found most effective, in the hope that some people can maybe try some of them for themselves?
I mean, like, I'll be honest, I'm lazy. Like, what you see on Instagram, yes, it's true. I will get up at 5 and I'll work until whatever. But at heart, I would love to wake up at 9 o'clock, go and get a coffee and a banana loaf and go back to bed. I would love to do that, but I can't do that. But I do get enjoyment out from getting up at 5. And I suppose I'm always prioritize sleep. Like, since working with Dr. Dean and kind of understanding I read a book called How We Sleep or Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker.
Yep.
I remember reading that, and it was almost like, again, bittersweet, because it was like, this is incredible, but when it opens your eyes to the implications of poor sleep and poor quality sleep, you're almost like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, the days when I was a kid growing up and I'd go and train at the gym at like 8 p.m. and I'd double scoop Jack 3D, I think, I'm going to bed with 400 meg caffeine. I'm not sleeping.
And all the other unknown stimulants in there.
Yeah. I mean, it was like totally unregulated back in the day. I was taking all sorts of stuff, and I think I'm not getting any like deep REM sleep here at all. No wonder my performance at school is awful when I've got concentration problems. So now it's a case of, even if I want to get up at 5, I have to be in bed and pretty switched off by about 9 o'clock. So I will take the kind of required steps pre-bed. But yeah, I'll wake up at 5. I got into a habit of having like a ginger shot. I don't know why. I just think it's that element of kind of waking you up a little bit. Hydrate as well. Use an electrolyte supplement from Supplement Needs to have a electrolyte. So I've got into a habit now of managing to get right under the cold shower. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was always a bit like, why are you getting the cold shower? But you feel so invigorated and so ready and energized and focused to work off the back of a cold shower, like cold water immersion. It's incredible. You know,
it's a state change, I think, is the main sort of evidence base, isn't it? It's because if you go from a groggy, sort of tired, half asleep to whoa, then all of a sudden you've completely shifted your state of mind and state of body, and that means that you're ready for the day. It's massively. A much more it's a fast acting caffeine that doesn't block adenosine, is the way that I look at it.
It is, and that's even before any caffeine goes in. I just think the kind of mixture of being hydrated, I'll try as best as possible as well to put some form of either guided meditation on or just relaxing music for 10 minutes whilst I wake up, just to stretch as well. So I'll always try and get like a 10-minute routine, even if it's guided or just simply putting on some relaxing music to stretch, and then I'll go and jump in the cold shower, which the benefits have been incredible. But I tend to like to work in blocks as well. So if I wake up at 5, I'll be on the computer at 6, or if I wake up at 6, I'll always give myself an hour. I think it's unreasonable to wake up at 5 and I'm 5:15 and working. I think I need a good hour to kind of get ready and prepared psychologically for the day of work. But I'll work in chunks. Like the most recent intake for the Ibiza Classic contestants, say I'm doing four startups a day. In order for me to give the highest amount of quality my side with video onboarding and training programming and understanding them as the individual, I want to be in a spot whereby I can solely dedicate an hour and a half to 2 hours on that one individual. Then I'll go take the dog for a walk. Then I'll go back and do another one. I'll have lunch, or I'll go and train. I'll come back. So it's I don't really work well in like that kind of corporate 9 to 5. It's staggered throughout the day, but those little bursts of work that I can do is kind of that hard work, light work mentality. It is the general setup. Or what I'll tend to do is I'm not very productive post-workout So I'll get all of the hard work done prior to that, and then when I get home, it's more so kind of doing Instagram posts or color grading here and there that doesn't require a huge amount of kind of effort from me. So yeah, that's the general setup. And then like I said, I try and wind down about 7:30, 8 o'clock. You know, I want to be. We always say to ourselves like no phones an hour before bed, but it's hard. You know, I'll put the screen the night mode on, and I'll decrease the brightness, and I won't reply to. That's why I've got a second phone for clients, so I won't reply to them till the morning time. And then I'll just take a couple of supplements like Support Max Neuro and things like L-theanine and ashwagandha, just to kind of that. When I take those supplements, it's like that switch. My brain goes, right, it's time to relax now, and then I'm just in bed and I'm ready, and I sleep relatively well.
Do you find yourself wanting to make up for lost time socially and exploratively in a sense, whereby you think because you've given so much of your life to the bodybuilding cause, that you now think, you know what, I'm going to try and fill in the gaps?
Absolutely. I'm out more frequent, and I moved house a couple of weeks ago back to my local area where the boys are, and it's been great. You know, that instant kind of removal of a grey cloud when I was living. Not that it was bad where I was living before, but I was quite isolated. You know, I moved there because I was with my partner at the time, and I moved there because it was next to my gym, Crayford, and that's where we all trained. But then one, we separated, and then two, I didn't compete anymore. So I'm like, well, what the fuck am I doing here? You know, what am I realistically doing here? So I messaged my landlord and said, look, I need to get out of here quickly. So since moving back, I've become not like a yes man. Like I'm not just out every night and getting pissed. But you know, I went out last night, went out on Saturday. I'm going out this Saturday. But it's just normal life. And I think your bodybuilding kind of creates the image that isn't normal. Like being sociable isn't normal when it is. It's totally fine to kind of adopt this non-Gary V approach of doing Monday to Friday. There's nothing wrong with working a Monday to Friday. That's what I do now. I'll do all my check-ins from Monday to Friday, and I have the weekends free. That's a normal life, and that makes me happy. And I'm not going to be pressured by a soundbite from a business guru that says I've got to work Sunday and Saturday. So it's just not me. So I'm definitely making up for lost time. I did push it a little bit when I was bodybuilding. You know, I still would go out and I'd try to be sociable, and I'd have like a soda water lime kind of thing. But then it's just not the same. You know, you go out with your friends and they're getting drunk, and you think, oh, I'm going home, boys. So I would try and get out, but I've stayed close friends with my lot for years, and they're very supportive, which is important. When I was bodybuilding, they were always there. But I'm definitely at a point now whereby you want to go for a beer, yeah, I'm there. So I do feel like I'm making up for a little bit of lost time.
And you found it's made its way back into your life in a healthy way rather than a self-destructive, let's fully send it to make up for lost time sort of way.
Yeah, and look how many I was scared when I did make that shift from bodybuilding that I'd lose, a core demographic. I would lose a lot of people here, and it wasn't the case at all. I've probably lost a few diehards, like a few comments like, oh, if, where's the bodybuilding gone? It's like, well, I've discussed where it's gone, mate. Like I've not changed as a person, but it almost opens a whole new world, because people want to be able to eat well, lose weight, socialize, and have the occasional drink, and it's so doable. You can still get into shape, but we've been kind of there's been like this illusion that we can't do that. Like in order to look good, you have to get rid of that, and it's just not the case at all. So I suppose it's nice for me to document this now, and I made a point last week in saying I've got a holiday in 12 weeks, and I want to give an insight into my life of, look, I went out on Monday and I went out on Saturday and had a couple of drinks, but I'm still in the gym and I'm still training, I'm still sleeping and eating well. It's doable,
Would you do anything differently if you could do it all over again?
No, I never. There's never. I get that question a lot, and it's absolutely, there's some decisions that I've made in the past that I would probably say I'm regretting a little bit now, but life, that's just life, and you have to learn to adapt. And unfortunately, these instances happen, and you have to. Yes, that decision that was made may have not been the correct one, but from that, I've managed to have a good year of just complete self-improvement and kind of finding myself, if you wanted to kind of call it like that a little bit. So no, I would never do anything different. I don't think anyone should have that mentality of, if you fuck up, you learn from it and you move on. There's never live with a regret.
And you wouldn't be exactly where you are now if it wasn't for everything that's happened to this point, as the way I view things.
Of course, I'd probably still be in GNC or Holland and Barrett, living for the, well, I used to work Sunday, so I couldn't even enjoy Saturday. But yeah, I'd probably still be in that kind of almost closed mindset of just being a cog.
So what are the next 2 to 3 years look like for you? Obviously, you've got the business, you've got your training, you've got to move to a more sociable environment. Describe what the perfect next couple of years look like for you.
Yeah, I really want to broaden that kind of. I think we was having a discussion about this the other day, because a lot of my friends, when we go out for a drink, they're dieting. It's mad how so many of Gen Pop just don't understand kind of basic requirements for food and output and things like that. And it's like, how can I adopt what I've learned from bodybuilding into like a bite size, almost Joe Wicks style, but with a bit more value and a bit more content, as opposed to just, hi guys, I'm Joe Wicks, eat this fucking, how can I actually educate people here? How can I sit them down and go, you're having 1,400 calories, you are going to burn out within 2 weeks. How can I explain that the body needs X amount of calories just to survive? How can I explain that you can eat this food? And it's so funny, because I'll have some food on a Saturday night. I'll have some like chicken goujons and chips, and my lot will be like, "Oh, how do you eat that and look like that?" And I'm like, trying as best as it's possible to explain it. So my focus on the next couple of years is education. Is kind of going back to where I first started, when I was working in a college and working with students and kind of taking them through nutrition and things like that. And I'd like to pick things up again with Luke Johnson and kind of work together on seeing if we can create something special here. So yeah, I'd say that the next 2 to 3 years is definitely rebuilding quite a large client base. I mean, the buzz the last couple of days of getting physique shots through and seeing some guys, and think, God, the potential there is insane. And kind of, it's mad that when people put their trust in you to change their physique in their life. And a close friend of mine, Max, who was last year's competitor, got quite emotional on Instagram today, saying
I saw that this morning, actually, just before this. Yeah.
And I was like, fucking hell, careful. This is setting me off here. And you forget how much of an impact you have on people's lives. You really do. You don't take it for granted. I think you're so focused on the task at hand, you never really kind of take into consideration, like, we are changing people's lives here. And you go to Body Power and we'll go to expos, and people will like start crying and going like, I can't put into words how much you've done for me. I think, oh my God, I didn't even realize. So definitely kind of regaining that element of just, I suppose, compassion. You lose a little bit when you're bodybuilding. You become so narrow-minded and fixated on like, I have to get shredded for stage. I don't care about you lot. And it's just nice to get that back. So yeah, education. Look to we had the members site a couple of years ago that was fantastic, and it's about kind of rebuilding that and repurposing it for Gen Pop clients, as opposed to just sort of anabolic steroid users, and just creating some form of academy whereby people can jump in and jump out. And I really like the element of specialised individual courses as well. So kind of uniting the best in the game, the best in the industry, to say, look, you're the best at power building, or you're the best at this and that. Let's work together, do a course, and we can go from there. So definitely kind of galvanising that education element to it, yeah.
Do you want to continue to use the knowledge and experience that you have on anabolics to help keep that moving forwards education-wise, or do you think you want to move away from that side of your life entirely?
No, I very much want to stick with it, but as opposed to educating on what the sort of correct dosage is, educate them on, this is probably not for you. I've had a quite a good couple of conversations with a few companies that want to do some work together, and it's probably more so raising awareness than going down the route of like, let me take your money and I can tell you what is best to run on cycle. I thought that as it's a real tricky one, because it's like when someone comes to you and says, I'm going to take anabolics, whether you say yes or no, you kind of put in this predicament of, oh God, I'm going to have to like educate this person, aren't I? But it's more so, all right, firstly, I want to tell you what potentially is about to happen to you. And then me saying that is enough for them to go, oh shit, all right, yeah, maybe you're right. So it's definitely more about awareness. And I think I'd love to work with a company, or even create my own kind of charity/company whereby it is raising awareness about the mental health and the psychological implications of anabolic steroid users. Because we're kind of coming to this end of the wave whereby we're seeing the effects of what's happening to these guys that have been using for 4 or 5 years, and their minds are broken. You know what I mean? They've become reliant on these compounds. They become reliant on the lifestyle, and they want change, and they're too scared to change. So yeah, it's definitely about raising that awareness that I think is needed.
I think it's a very, very underserved space as well for a silent epidemic
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
the day-to-day gym users all over the world. I think Psalms in the States and TikTok is the sort of next level to this that I'm not even going to pretend I understand anything about that world or whatsoever. But there's a lot of concerning things coming through. There is very uninformed usage, and there is use and abuse, isn't there? I think this is one of the main things I learned from my powerlifting days, is there were the deliberated, cautious users, and then there were the absolute full send users, or full send abusers rather, that just made you think a bit like, oh, I'm a bit worried about that person long term. How's that going to unfold? And I think moving into that education space, you are filling a gap that needs filled for the well-being and long-term sustainability of the people in the position that maybe you could have ultimately ended up in if you just continued to be a slave to this vice that was, well, it become a vice, hadn't it, bodybuilding?
Yeah.
So, it's good to know that space is going to be filled by yours truly.
Of course, yeah. But hopefully, it'll be lovely to be a pioneer of that sort of that particular. And you're seeing firsthand now, whereby I'll have discussions with the boys and say like, you're kind of going against your original mantra of like low dose. I'm not taking a lot, and it's like, in order for me to get where I am and be the best, I'm having to go against what I preached, and now I'm putting myself in a position whereby, my health is deteriorating, but I'm going to the Olympia stage, or I need to get this pro card, and it's not. I wouldn't say sad, because I don't want to like look down at these people at all. It's not the case, but it is a little bit like, my God, I almost want to scream like, guys, there's more to life than this, but that is their life and they love that, and I'm not going to change that. And if they're happy, then who the fuck am I to say anything? Do you know what I mean?
I think the main thing, and look, it's a conversation I've had with myself in the past 3-4 weeks from a sort of different perspective, is if you stop enjoying, or the thing that you normally enjoy gives you joy stops giving you that joy,
Exactly.
assess why that might be. Is it other things in your life that are having such a pressurizing effect that you actually can't enjoy the time that you have to do the things that you enjoy, or are those things not serving you in the way that they used to, in which case maybe it's time to make a change? And as you've so aptly demonstrated, doing so can unlock a whole new chapter to your life, a whole new positive version of your life. So I think that the real trap from a bodybuilding point of view, from a general training, general fitness, general ambition point of view, is knowing when to call it quits and knowing when to make a change, rather than, as I think you've been careful to say, not to bash anyone in any space here. I think the challenge is knowing when the jig is up and when to move on.
And I think that comes when it starts to, like you said, become a chore. It certainly felt for me like a chore. And I always knew that I'd have another season in me competing, because when I would compete, the excitement to get back in the gym and build new tissue was there. And when that flame was gone, I was like, right, now I'm done. I'm not going to force this any longer. I'll compete and I'll do it, and we can create content and go down the whole route of like, we did a bit of redemption, and that was absolutely fine. But oh my God, I was so done. And I had a second show after the one that I won. And I just like, well, what am I doing? I've gone out, I've won the show. I've got 3 weeks for another one. I don't want to do it. Then thankfully my coach was like, let's do it. Let's put on a show performance. I got third place, and I was like, right, time to hang the trunks up here. We're completely done. So once it starts feeling like a chore, I think at that point you need to reassess and have a good. And it's hard. Don't get me wrong, man. It's hard. Being critical of yourself is fucking difficult. But I think if you as an individual can look at yourself and go, look, and in all walks, not just bodybuilding, if you can look at yourself and go like, I was the sole reason why this relationship broke down because of I was X, Y, and Z, then it's tough. But once you do that, like the resilience that you build mentally and is very, very good.
It's exactly what I had 2-3 weeks ago. Most recent podcast before this was my reflections on that, whereby I assessed the structures and systems by which my day-to-day life was operating, and they weren't good enough. I'd failed myself as a delegator, as a effective leader, as a sort of self-manager in terms of managing the day-to-day cadence and responsibility. And the systems and way I was living my life wasn't good enough. So that led me to a point where I was burnt out, reeling, couldn't focus on one thing at a time. So recalibrated, reassessed, restructured, and now things are a little bit different. And hopefully I've got it right this time, but I might not have done, and that's not a problem, as long as I can reassess in the future without, I think the key detail being before you hit rock bottom to start climbing back up. It's having that visibility and foresight, I think, is the key as well, which comes from practice.
Of course, you need to be aware of that, and I think we can all see when burnout is coming close. Like for me, when I start to feel like I'm completely done with social media, I'll take my little 7-day social media holiday. Like I'm due one of them, because I start getting irritable, and I consume content too much. And then when I'm at that point, I'm like, right, I need to take a week off here, because it's just not working. In an ideal world, I look at my Instagram feed and it'd just be nothing. But unfortunately, we can't have that. So at that point, it's kind of like it instigates me to go, right, 7 days off, refresh, do what you want, go walk the dog, whatever, and then we're back, and it is nice. It's really nice feeling.
Brilliant. I think main thing from my point of view, it's just amazing to see the evolution that you've gone on from an individualistic point of view, but from a really ambitious, self-driven goal point of view, because it's very difficult to pivot when you feel that you've given so much time to something, to then pivot to something new. And always be a student, kind of a cliche we hear a lot in this space. But I think it's something that once you can abandon ego and do that, you can live a much freer life, I think.
Absolutely.
Can't you?
Absolutely, and there's so many more possibilities. I think, and it's nice to see the kind of impact that I've had on a few, like I would say, amateur bodybuilders that have said, "I've watched your journey and you've inspired me to just step away from the stage." And there is life outside of it. I've had a kid, or I'm going out with my girlfriend, and I've kind of rebuilt relationships. I'm like, yeah, look, of course, it's always been there. You've just been clouded by this bodybuilding narrative that you're not allowed to do that. So it's really endearing to kind of hear that feedback.
Brilliant, fantastic. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, it's I'll probably be off on Instagram soon, but yeah, it'll be TM Cycles. I think I've been unshadow banned now, but it's TM Cycles, the same as the YouTube, and then my new business is called Flow by More. So that'll be more kind of recipes, and that'll be more of the educational side that we'll be going down. So yeah, you can hit me up on those two. And of course, we have the Off the Cuff podcast that we do every week. We do it in seasons now, so we've got one more to go, and then we're back in for season 2. So yeah, few different avenues you can follow me on.
And please do. They're all excellent avenues to follow TM Cycles on. I can highly recommend them. So thank you again, my man, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for your time.